In a period marked by the desire to find meaning, a dilemma arises that for many seems unsolvable. Looking at it hastily, addiction appears as a self-destructive behavior, something that should be controlled by the simple act of wanting. However, this interpretation is incomplete. Carl Jung, a notable interpreter of the psyche, pointed out that every compulsive behavior reveals an apparently innocent story. There is a gap between who we are and who we aspire to become. According to the Swiss thinker, the issue is not restricted to the substance or the habit itself. There is an inner cry for an essential point, something that offers direction and clarifies one's journey. In his reflections, Jung is credited with saying that no addict can be free without experiencing some kind of spiritual elevation. From this angle, the addictive substance or behavior acts as a temporary symbol, a way of relieving the growing restlessness. However, this relief is short-lived. Over time, the inner discomfort returns, intensifies, and feeds back into the circle of anguish. The stories of people seeking a solution to their dissatisfaction in alcohol, narcotics, or even unbridled consumerism illustrate something greater. There is a thirst that seeks to be quenched by something greater than routine. In several ancient civilizations, psychoactive substances were used in sacred rituals, with the intention of providing authentic communion with cosmic or divine forces. However, in our time, there is a lack of guidance capable of giving meaning to this act. Instead of inner expansion, fragmentation occurs. If you identify with these reflections and want to strengthen your renewal process, like this video and subscribe to the channel. This way, you'll help us continue to bring you content that encourages each person to explore new perspectives for growth. This disconnection with what Jung would call the inner center points to an essential lack. The compulsive habit so visible nowadays would be the symptom of a search for completeness that has not found an adequate root. When the subject moves further and further away from their essence, dissatisfaction multiplies. In this way, addiction silently represents a desire to re-establish contact with that which gives meaning to the human journey. Jung saw in the individual's longing a demonstration that there is a psychological hunger asking for an answer. And this inner voice, when recognized, can be the initial step towards true transformation. On one occasion, Bill Wilson, known for founding Alcoholics Anonymous, came into contact with the reflections of a renowned scholar of the human soul. He discovered through a letter the thesis that the real remedy for slavery to substances or impulses does not lie in strict disciplines or severe punishments. Instead, inner renewal emerges as the only way to fill the void that corrodes the psyche. The thinker behind this vision believed that people yearn for symbols, stories, and images that can offer a sense of belonging and explanation for human experiences. According to this psychologist, when these components lose their strength or cease to guide the individual, a deep illness sets in. That hidden wound in the essence pushes the sufferer to seek immediate solutions, often in risky ways. Repeating the harmful habit, however, fails to bring lasting satisfaction because it doesn't respond to the real need. The need to rediscover the inner axis. In this context, the self-destructive inclination is seen as the result of a maladjustment in the inner structure, a symptom that cries out for understanding and acceptance. The caregiver's role is not limited to offering replacement substances. More important than any medication, the person in imbalance is trying to rediscover something precious and forgotten. This process involves making space for a new state of consciousness to emerge, something capable of giving a reason for existing and a connection with that core that has been abandoned along the way. This perspective profoundly influenced the approach that Alcoholics Anonymous adopted when it was founded. It wasn't enough to impose external decrees, it was necessary to promote an experience that would recover the meaning of life, so that each participant could find the true antidote within themselves. Vital energy still pulses in those who seem to have lost all hope. The desire for change, however small, shows that the search for wholeness does not disappear. This scholar also saw in every problematic behavior a living symbol that begs for recognition. When listened to with empathy, this symbol can reveal reserves of courage and faith, opening the way to real inner change. The voice of someone experiencing compulsion doesn't follow the usual logic. Instead, it reveals a subtle message. Something is out of alignment internally. It's not a question of excusing harmful behavior, but of investigating its sources, identifying needs that have remained ignored for too long. One of the main contributions of the Swiss thinker mentioned in the previous sections was to demonstrate that repressed contents, pains, fears, desires don't just disappear by being swept away into an obscure corner. He pointed out that each individual has a set of hidden aspects, which he called the hidden side. Within this territory, everything that the person considers unacceptable or incompatible with the desired image of themselves accumulates. However, what doesn't receive recognition ends up finding other avenues of expression, often creating dependencies. In this sense, the search for sensations that bring quick relief hides an intimate conflict. On the one hand, there are those who crave approval, control, and success. On the other, there are frustrations, memories of suffering, emotions that have been stifled. The unbalanced person almost never realizes the confrontation going on inside them. Generally, they believe that the problem lies with the object of consumption or the environment, without noticing that the real clash takes place within their own psychic structure. When this clash is not understood, the compulsion ends up returning, even if one habit is replaced by another. The emptiness remains, accompanied by irritation or sadness because the root of the discomfort has not been dealt with. Instead of seeing these harmful repetitions as a mere failure, the author of the hidden side theory taught that they represent signs that there is something to be illuminated. Constant anxiety would be the symptom of an inner part that asks to be listened to and welcomed. For those who accompany or try to help someone in this scenario, the great challenge is to encourage a frank look at the hidden suffering, instead of just condemning external attitudes. Only when the person identifies what their heart really needs can they free themselves from the triggers that keep them trapped in the vicious circle. Through this process of awareness, change becomes feasible. Courage and sincerity are the keys to dealing with those intimate corners that remain hidden. The individual who faces compulsive behaviors, often seen as merely destructive, carries within them subtle messages about old wounds that have never received attention. Behind these repetitive habits lies a process that requires confronting memories, emotions, and desires that have been buried over time. Accepting and incorporating disowned content doesn't mean applauding the damage done to our surroundings. Instead, it suggests a willingness to uncover the root of each action, understanding why the search for substances or impulsive acts has become so irresistible. This point of view does not remove responsibility from those who resort to immediate relief, but it does broaden the understanding that present choices are often echoes of previous experiences. Many people discover, when they revisit their own history, that moments of abuse, humiliation, or abandonment have remained unresolved, generating a source of unease that drives escape behaviors. When this internal pain is not acknowledged, it is reborn indirectly, projected onto everyday situations or nurturing constant resentment. With each attempt to banish negative emotions, the emptiness only worsens, appearing again in the form of anxiety, irritability, or deep sadness. In these circumstances, real change is not limited to giving up an addiction. We need to look at our own reflection with compassion, paving the way for an honest encounter with aspects that previously generated shame or fear. This process can awaken a transformative spiritual experience, as the person often realizes that there is a sacred dimension in accepting the existence of light and darkness within themselves. A journey of this kind does not happen in a linear or immediate way. Relapses can happen, and each step requires a willingness to accept weaknesses and learn from each experience. Even so, by recognizing that the obsessive impulse is actually a call to decipher renegade aspects, the person discovers an opportunity to be reborn. They stop seeing themselves as a hopeless case and begin to glimpse, in this suffering, the possibility of finding genuine meaning. The urge that drives the repetitive use of substances or other practices often reflects a distorted attempt to achieve some kind of internal unity. There are those who unconsciously seek to dissolve ego barriers or find something that offers peace, but the outcome is usually the opposite. Instead of fullness, greater isolation emerges. For genuine change to occur, it is essential to discover an inner emblem that organizes psychological experience. This element is not imposed by dogma or external determinations. It reveals itself gradually, after the person recognizes and accepts their own wounds. When someone experiences this acceptance, the psyche feels understood. Then the map that was previously broken starts to take direction. It is at this point that rites, myths, and ancestral narratives demonstrate their importance. They have always served to guide humanity through critical periods, enabling the symbolic rebirth of an old identity into a renewed one. Thus, giving up an addiction is not just about stopping consuming. It also implies an inner farewell to the old image of oneself, accompanied by an authentic surrender to the internal healing process. In this surrender, symbols gain strength. Fire is no longer seen as pure and simple destruction, but as purification. Darkness becomes fertile ground for the emergence of truths. That seemingly invincible impulse gradually reveals opportunities for growth. Although some external support, therapies, help groups, spiritual guidance can help, these tools are no substitute for individual experience. Genuine transmutation takes place at an invisible level, when the person themselves decides not to run away from themselves anymore. At this point, the path that was previously seen as a failure takes on heroic contours. The pain doesn't disappear but takes on a different purpose. From being an obstacle, it becomes an instructor. Instead of being erased, it teaches about legitimate needs that had been forgotten. In this way, the story of suffering becomes a gateway to self-knowledge, allowing the individual to find a meaning capable of uniting the scattered parts of their existence. And finally, it becomes clear that human beings have an intimate need to connect with something greater. A longing that is not always satisfied by reason alone, but rather by experiences endowed with symbolism and meaning. When it is understood that harmful behavior can express a misguided desire to transform one's own history, the chance arises to look at the problem from another angle. Instead of labeling an addiction as an irreversible failure, it is possible to interpret it as a call for renewal, even if it is followed by mistaken choices. This view does not disqualify individual responsibility, but highlights that painful experiences can paradoxically lead to valuable discoveries. The experience of reaching the bottom does not cancel out the search for meaning. Many people who have gone through emotional breakdowns have risen with greater authenticity, because they have understood in practice what is vital for their own balance. In this process, there is a symbolic element that acts as a seed, something germinated in the depths of the psyche ready to sprout as soon as it receives the necessary attention. Then what once seemed like ruin turns out to be fertile ground for the growth of a more sincere identity. Change also implies moving from anesthesia to presence. Instead of running away from inner concerns, the person wants to participate in their own journey. This disposition does not make suffering disappear, but changes its function. It ceases to be an exclusive source of guilt and becomes an indicator of learning. That state which used to shame now opens a portal to subjective discoveries. Because discomfort is understood as a message. As a different relationship with personal history is established, the compulsion begins to lose strength. The impulse to escape gives way to a desire to observe what is unresolved. This new stance doesn't require perfection, but sincerity and a willingness to face up to what's been stored away. As the great explorer of the human mind taught us, there are no ready-made formulas. Each individual needs to find their own route. At the heart of any addiction lies a cry for something that goes beyond mere survival. When this plea is finally accepted, there is a reconciliation with the mystery of existence. And at that point, affliction no longer requires explanations. It simply opens the way to a freedom born of a true encounter with oneself. Share it with anyone who might benefit and leave your comment below. Together we can cultivate a space of welcome and growth.